Welcome. Today we are conducting an in-depth exploration of the source material provided regarding the tragic 2011 incident often identified in media coverage as the Lululemon murder.
And, it's really important that we start this conversation by acknowledging the gravity of what happened.
Absolutely. This isn't about sensationalism. It's about understanding a very complex and deceptive crime scene.
The sources detail the violent death of Jana Troxell Murray, who was killed on March 11, 2011. And our deepest sympathies, of course, go out to her family and everyone who was affected by this awful event.
Our focus here is going to be exclusively on the evidence, on the investigation, and how it really systematically dismantled what was a very elaborate false narrative created by the perpetrator.
And the sources are unequivocal on that point. Jana Murray's coworker, Brittany Norwood, was the person responsible.
So that's really the core of what we want to look at today. How was the truth revealed? What did the evidence show?
Exactly. So we're going to structure our discussion kind of systematically. First, we'll examine the shocking initial discovery and the story Norwood told, a story that at first glance seemed pretty convincing.
And then we'll spend a good amount of time on the forensics. This is really the heart of the case. The blood stain patterns, the wounds, the footprints, all the things that proved her account was just, whoa, impossible.
We'll also get into some crucial external testimony from witnesses nearby and piece together the true timeline, and that really focuses on what seems like a very minor motive for such extreme violence.
And we'll end by confirming the legal outcome. Just for context for you, Brittany Norwood was convicted of first-degree murder in November of 2011.
And then in January 2012, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
So let's get into the details of the investigation itself, starting with that morning.
The morning of March 12, 2011.
The sources really paint a picture of just profound shock. You have a store manager just walking into work expecting a normal day.
And finding the exact opposite. I mean, this wasn't just a simple break-in. The scene was designed to look like pure chaos.
Right, that was the intention. That was the whole point of the staging.
Precisely. So the manager arrives and immediately sees these huge red flags. The door, for one, should have been locked and alarmed. It wasn't. It was unlocked.
And inside?
Inside, the visual was just immediate confirmation of a violent struggle. Merchandise was thrown everywhere, racks were tipped over, even these heavy mannequins were strewn across the floor. Just total disarray.
So you've got a ransacked store, an unlocked door, a truly alarming sight. But something else stopped the manager from going further in alone, right?
Yes. The manager reported hearing a sound. It was faint, but it was a distinct moaning coming from the back of the store.
Understandably, that would be terrifying.
Of course. And given the level of mess, the silence otherwise, she was cautious. She backed out and went outside to get help.
And she found someone nearby to go back in with her.
She did. She returned with a man who was outside, and they went in to search the store together.
And it's during this second search that they find them. They find two employees.
They do, and the immediate contrast between the two victims must have been incredibly striking and very confusing for anyone walking in.
What was that contrast?
Well, they found Jana Murray first. She was in a back hallway, face down in a pool of blood. She was tragically already deceased. And the sources confirmed there was a ligature around her neck. It was a scene of just immense overt violence.
And then they found Brittany Norwood?
In the bathroom. And she was described as being only semi-conscious. She had plastic zip-tees around her wrists and ankles, and there was some blood on her face from what looked like a pretty superficial wound.
So the police arrived to this scene. You have a horrific murder victim on one hand, and then a survivor who appears to have been assaulted and tied up. It points directly to a multiple attacker scenario.
That's exactly how it looked. And you have bloody footprints everywhere, tracking all through the store, the retail floor, the back areas. It's a very confusing scene.
So at this point, law enforcement is treating Norwood as a victim, as a survivor.
Naturally. Her account, which she gave after she got some medical treatment, that became the initial framework for the entire investigation. They were looking for intruders who had come from outside.
And this is where the fabrication really starts. She uses one single verifiable fact to anchor this incredibly elaborate lie.
That's a perfect way to put it. She knew the alarm records would show Jana let her back in, so she built her story around that.
What did she claim?
She claimed that after they had closed up the store for the night, she realized she had left her wallet inside. She called Jana, who came back and unlocked the door for her at 10:05 p.m., And that detail, the time, it was verified by the alarm system logs.
So that gives her a plausible reason for being back in the store after closing.
Exactly. It establishes her presence. And once she had that anchor, she introduced the fictional attackers.
What was the detailed story she gave them?
Norwood alleged that just a few minutes after Jana let her back in, two men burst into the store. She described them as wearing dark clothing, ski masks, the whole thing.
And according to her, they were immediately violent.
Extremely violent. She claimed they attacked both women, that they sexually assaulted them, and then after killing Jana, they bound Norwood and just left her for dead.
So she's painting this picture of a random, brutal robbery and assault by outsiders. It's a narrative that's perfectly tailored to explain everything. It explains the ransacked store, the violence against Jana, and her own, relatively minor injuries and restraints.
It was a comprehensive story. It was designed to account for every single detail that investigators would find at the scene, and its main purpose was to redirect all of that investigative scrutiny completely away from her.
So for the police, the job now becomes testing every single element of that story against the hard physical evidence they found.
And that's where her story begins to fall apart.
This is really where we shift from just a crime story to a fascinating study in forensic science. The initial assumption was masked intruders, but the sources are so clear that the physical evidence started screaming contradictions almost immediately.
The whole perception shifted the moment investigators really understood the sheer personal nature of the violence against Jana Murray.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a typical robbery that goes wrong, it usually involves quick, targeted violence. The goal is to subdue a witness or silence them quickly and get out. What happened to Jana Murray was something far more intense and far more prolonged.
The number of wounds cited in the sources is just staggering. It's almost hard to comprehend.
It is. The medical examiner determined that Jana sustained a minimum of 331 separate wounds. And when a number like that is used in court, it's not just a raw count, it's a classification of many different types of trauma.
So we're talking about more than just one type of injury.
Far more. We're talking about extensive defensive wounds, which means she fought back. She fought desperately and for a long time. She suffered blunt force trauma, multiple sharp force injuries, and of course the marks from the ligature.
That kind of intensity, what does it tell an investigator about the perpetrator's intent?
It tells them this was not a quick attempt to incapacitate someone during a robbery. The sheer volume and variety of those injuries, it proves this was an attack fueled by rage, by a personal intent, and a fierce determination to make sure the victim was silenced.
It sounds more like a loss of control.
A profound loss of control, where the perpetrator just relentlessly attacked until Jana was dead. That is highly inconsistent with two masked intruders who would be focused on an efficient escape.
And the weapons used, they seem to underscore that point. They suggest an attack of opportunity, grabbing whatever was nearby, rather than something brought to the scene.
Precisely. Investigators found evidence showing at least 5 different implements were used. And these were not specialized weapons. They found a knife, a hammer, which they actually traced back to a toolbox in the store, and the ligature itself.
So using whatever was within reach.
Yes. Ad hoc weapons. It strongly suggests a fight that erupted unexpectedly, intensely, an internal confrontation, not an external one.
So now, let's pivot to the other person in the room, Brittany Norwood, the one who claimed to be the surviving victim. Her injuries were really the first clear red flag.
They were. In huge contrast to Jana's catastrophic injuries, Norwood's were classified by medical personnel as relatively minor. But the key forensic discovery wasn't about the severity of her cuts. It was about the characteristics of the wounds and the blood evidence around them.
The detail about the blood on her face is one of the most famous parts of this case. It's simple physics exposing a very complex lie.
It is the ultimate forensic betrayal of her story. Norwood claimed she'd been tied up, semi-conscious, lying on the bathroom floor for hours and hours.
Right.
The forensic experts at the trial, they focused specifically on the trail of blood that came from that small cut on her forehead. And the testimony confirmed that the blood had flowed in a pattern that dripped straight down her face and onto her clothing.
Why is that such definitive proof that she was staging it?
It all comes down to gravity. If she had been lying down, like she said she was, the blood would have tracked horizontally. It would have smeared across her face or the floor as she moved.
But it didn't.
It didn't. The clean, straight-down drip pattern is only possible if she had been upright standing or sitting for a significant amount of time after she got that cut, while the blood was still actively flowing.
So it proves she cut herself and tied herself up much later, while she was fully conscious and upright.
It definitively proves she was actively staging her role as a victim.
Okay, so the blood evidence calls her physical state into question. But the footprint evidence, that's what systematically eliminated the intruders she described.
The footprint analysis was absolutely foundational to the prosecution's case. Investigators documented all the bloody prints, and they belonged to two different sets of shoes.
What were they?
One set matched Norwood's own shoes that she was wearing. The other set belonged to a pair of men's size 14 Reebok sneakers.
Where did they find those sneakers?
That's the suspicious part. They were found abandoned inside the store.
So she's introducing these men's shoes as belonging to the attackers. But where the tracks actually ended proved the shoes were just a prop.
Absolutely critical. The forensic mapping of the store showed that the bloody tracks from the size 14 sneakers did not lead to either of the store's exits. They just stopped, abruptly, inside the store.
If two masked men had actually committed this crime and escaped, their bloody footprints would lead out the door.
They would have to. They'd lead out of the building, onto the street, into an alley. The conclusion was inescapable. The person wearing those size 14 shoes was the perpetrator, and they had taken them off and discarded them before leaving. It confirmed Norwood had used them to fabricate the presence of male attackers.
And then there was the attempt to stage a sexual assault.
Right.
Another layer of this calculated deceit.
It was. She needed to fully flesh out this story of a violent robbery gone wrong, and sexual assault is often a component of that kind of extreme violence in, fictional narratives.
But the forensics didn't back it up.
Not at all. The forensic analysis found zero evidence of sexual assault on either woman. And the sources detailed just how desperate she was to create that impression. Norwood had actually used some kind of sharp object to cut a hole in Jana Murray's pants.
All to give the false appearance that a sexual crime had happened.
Exactly. And that is not the action of a terrified survivor. It's the calculated act of a perpetrator trying to cover her tracks.
So the forensic evidence was really enough to prove the scene was staged. But then you have the external witnesses who provided this crucial audio evidence that just completely contradicted her narrative of silent masked assailants.
Right. It confirmed the crime was rooted in a personal conflict that escalated.
It's amazing to think that it wasn't just the evidence inside the store. The walls themselves were, in a way, witnesses.
That's a great way to put it. The walls had ears. We're talking about the employees at the Apple store right next door. They became these unwitting but absolutely essential ear witnesses to what happened.
The shared wall between the two stores, it apparently transmitted sound very clearly.
It did. And during the investigation, both an employee and a manager from that Apple store confirmed they heard a significant amount of noise, an argument coming from the Lululemon side of the wall.
And this was happening exactly when the attack was taking place.
Yes. And they even had surveillance footage from inside the Apple store that they use to place those employees standing right near that shared wall during the critical time period.
The testimony from the employee is just, it's chilling. It brings the horror of what was happening into really sharp relief. What exactly did they report hearing?
The employee's testimony was so important because it captured the escalation of the fight. They testified they could clearly hear two women arguing. And crucially, they heard one woman desperately trying to de-escalate the situation.
What were the phrases she used?
Phrases like, "Talk to me, don't do this, talk to me, what's going on?" And that is not the language of someone being ambushed by masked strangers. That's the sound of someone trying to reason with an attacker they know.
And the sounds that came after that, they confirmed the argument turned violent very quickly.
Yes. After that verbal exchange, the employee reported hearing screams, then sounds that they described as being consistent with hitting or maybe dragging.
And then there was one last thing they heard.
One of the most haunting parts of the testimony. They heard a weak, fading voice pleading, "God help me, please help me." This auditory evidence, it confirmed the prolonged nature of the struggle. It confirmed its personal characteristics. It directly refuted the whole idea of a swift, quiet attack by robbers.
It is genuinely shocking to think that a life and death struggle was unfolding right next door, and the manager's reaction was to just dismiss it.
The manager did testify that he heard the noise, but he made a conscious choice to ignore it. His justification, as it's recorded in the sources, was that he thought it was just drama.
Just drama.
It's a tragic detail, isn't it? Especially in the context of what was actually happening. It shows how easily sounds of distress can be minimized, categorized as just a squabble, which allowed a brutal murder to continue right next door, unimpeded.
Beyond the sounds of the struggle, there was another major piece of evidence pointing to Norwood's cover-up, and that was a very peculiar location of Jana Murray's car.
The car was a huge problem for Norwood's story. Police found it parked 3 blocks away from the Lululemon store at a local farmer's market.
And the forensics on the car were critical.
Absolutely. Forensic testing revealed blood belonging to both Norwood and Murray was inside that car. And that demands an explanation, because why would masked intruders move a victim's car and risk being seen?
So when the police confronted Norwood with this evidence, she had to admit she moved it. She had to try to fit this fact into her fictional story.
Right. Her story had to evolve. Her revised version claimed that the masked men forced her to move Jana's car. She said they ordered her to drive it away and threatened to kill Jana if she didn't get back in under 10 minutes.
What was the supposed logic behind that?
Apparently, the goal was to make it look like Jana had successfully left the store earlier, to create confusion about the timeline of the attack.
But the internal contradiction in this part of her story is probably the most damning element. It confirms she wasn't a hostage. She was a deliberate actor.
Without a doubt. The fatal flaw in that whole revised account is what she claimed she saw while she was driving the car, supposedly under duress. She alleged that during that short drive, she actually saw a uniformed police officer.
And she didn't stop.
She never stopped. She never tried to signal for help. She never reported the situation to save the life of her coworker, who she claimed was being held hostage just a few blocks away. The only logical reason a terrified hostage wouldn't stop for a police officer is if there was no hostage and there were no masked men. There was only a desperate perpetrator trying to execute a cover-up.
So at this point in the investigation, the police have just scientifically dismantled her entire story. The blood, the footprints, the witnesses, the car. But the final critical question, especially for a charge of first-degree murder, was motive. Why? How did a simple workplace procedure escalate into something so incredibly violent?
And the sources confirm the truth is it's horrifying in its pettiness. The motive was rooted in a very consequential but minor workplace incident. It all centered on a standard security procedure at Lululemon.
Which was what?
At closing, employees were required to check each other's bags for any unpaid merchandise. A routine loss prevention check.
So this was a normal, expected part of closing up the store? It wasn't a targeted thing?
Not at all. It was entirely routine. And during this check, Jana Murray found a pair of Lululemon pants in Brittany Norwood's bag.
So, clear evidence of internal theft. Shoplifting.
Yes. And Jana, following the rules, immediately called their manager to report what she had found. The manager told Jana to just secure the store as usual and that she would deal with the employment consequences the next morning.
This is the trigger. This is the moment. Norwood is caught. She's facing being fired, public shame, and maybe even legal trouble for theft.
And that immediate threat of accountability, of exposure, that was the catalyst. Norwood understood that the manager knew she was a thief, and Jana Murray was the only witness to that fact.
Jana left the store after that call with the manager.
She did. But the investigation confirmed that within just a few minutes, Norwood made the calculated decision to lure her back.
And that decision to actively lure her back, that's what elevates this legally. It's what transforms it from, say, a sudden confrontation into a premeditated act.
Exactly. The evidence of that phone call proves premeditation. Norwood called Jana, claiming she had forgotten something, her wallet, most likely, which is a detail she later tried to weave into her fabricated story. She asked Jana to please come back and let her in.
And Jana, not knowing anything was wrong, returned.
She returned, completely unaware that she was walking right into a lethal ambush that Norwood had engineered for one reason: to eliminate the sole witness to her theft.
So let's just walk through the full sequence of the crime as the investigators reconstructed it. It really highlights the sheer audacity of the staging that followed.
Yeah. The reconstruction established that the violent attack and the murder itself happened almost immediately after Jana Murray got back to the store. And following the murder, the timeline shows Norwood executing this cover-up in a very calculated, though ultimately flawed, sequence of events.
So step one was moving the car to confuse the timeline.
Right. She moved Jana's car 3 blocks away to that farmer's market parking lot. The idea was to imply that Jana had left the store and driven away, which would make her presence later that night unexplained. It suggests she was abducted from somewhere else.
And the blood evidence in the car suggests Norwood was already injured at that point.
Yes, the mixed blood indicates she moved the car after the attack had begun.
So step 2 was making the store itself look like the scene of a massive violent robbery with multiple attackers.
And that's the most dramatic part of the staging. She spent a considerable amount of time just wrecking the store, tossing merchandise, brooms, mops, chairs, anything she could find to create that visual chaos that would support her robbery story.
And then came the most definitive piece of the fabrication, the size 14 shoes.
She put on the men's Reebok sneakers that she had either brought or found in the store, and she meticulously walked through the store, tracking Jana's blood across the floor. This was done for one reason and one reason only: to fabricate evidence of male assailants, to bolster her story that two large men were involved.
And the final step was preparing herself to be found the next morning.
She inflicted those relatively minor injuries on herself, including that cut on her forehead that would later betray her with the blood drip analysis. She then managed to secure the plastic zipties around her own wrists and ankles.
And she positioned herself in the bathroom.
She positioned herself in the bathroom, adopting that persona of the semi-conscious surviving victim. It was the last layer of the lie, all designed to make sure that when the manager arrived, Norwood would automatically be seen as a second victim, not the sole perpetrator.
So that detailed reconstruction, which was backed up by every single piece of scientific evidence, the blood, the footprints, the wounds, it allowed the police to move very quickly.
It did. The circumstantial evidence became completely overwhelming. It proved beyond any reasonable doubt that she acted alone and with premeditation. A week after the slaying, Brittany Norwood was arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder.
And that meticulous work from the prosecution, presenting this just mountain of forensic evidence, it led to a pretty inevitable conclusion in court. Let's just confirm the legal outcome for her.
After the trial, Brittany Norwood was convicted of first-degree murder. The sentencing took place on January 27, 2012.
And she received the mandatory punishment in Maryland for that crime.
Yes, life in prison without the possibility of parole. And she's currently serving that sentence in the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women.
This case, it really generated a huge amount of media attention. The combination of the shocking brutality, the very mundane retail setting, and this elaborate, almost unbelievable cover-up attempt, it just made it a recurring subject for true crime reporting.
The public was immediately fascinated by it. How could a minor retail theft spiral into such a monstrous crime? And because of that, the case was covered extensively by numerous true crime series.
The sources confirm it really became a staple in the genre, featured on a lot of widely consumed platforms.
Yeah, it was discussed on popular shows like Morbid and Generation Y. The sources also list extensive television coverage, which always seems to highlight the compelling nature of the forensic evidence.
Which television program specifically focused on the investigation?
It was featured on shows like Snapped pretty early on in 2012 and then Redrum in 2014. And the investigative details were revisited in episodes of Autopsy, Forensic Files 16, and even Murder in the 21st as recently as 2023.
And they all focus on the science.
They consistently highlight how the physical science, especially the bloodstain patterns and the footprint analysis, were absolutely key to solving the case.
And for anyone interested in a really deep report from the ground level, there was also a book written about the investigation.
That's right. A police reporter for the Washington Post, Dan Morse, he followed the case very closely. In 2013, he published a book called The Yoga Store Murder, the shocking true account of the Lululemon Athletica killing. And that really ensured that the full, detailed investigative journey was publicly documented, from the moment the manager walked in all the way to the final conviction.
So when you look back across all of the source material, what really stands out?
I think the most impactful insight isn't just that a horrible crime occurred, but that this incredibly elaborate scheme that was designed to conceal it was unraveled by simple physics and just careful observation. The case is this grim illustration of how quickly the fear of exposure, losing your job over a pair of stolen pants, can escalate into extreme, calculated violence to eliminate a witness.
The sources really reveal a profound disconnect, don't they? The triviality of the motive versus the totality of the violence, the sheer persistence it would take to inflict 331 wounds, and then to methodically stage the scene, move the car, make that deceptive call to lure Jana back, just speaks volumes about the perpetrator's determination to escape accountability at any cost.
And that determination was just systematically countered by the precision of forensic science, the blood that dripped straight down, the size 14 footprints that went nowhere, the audio evidence of a personal argument. All of it served to contradict every single element of her lie. At the end of the day, the forensic evidence was just far more honest than the perpetrator.
It really brings us back to that one unsettling moment detailed in the source material. The Apple Store manager dismissing those terrifying sounds of a violent conflict as just drama.
That response, it really encapsulates a difficult lesson from this tragedy. A prolonged, violent struggle with desperate pleas for help was filtered through this lens of minimization. Characterizing that noise as mere drama reveals a societal tendency we have to categorize conflict happening next to us as, non-threatening or purely personal. And that removes any perceived responsibility to intervene or even just report it.
And considering those sounds were the audible evidence of a premeditated murder unfolding in real time, the question this case forces us to reflect on is crucial. What does this tragic sequence of events tell us about the high cost of assuming that the conflict in our peripheral spaces is simply not our business? It's a moment of reflection on how we process and potentially dismiss the vital signs of distress happening just beyond our immediate circle.
It affirms the necessity of looking beyond the surface narrative and examining the hard, unvarnished facts provided by the investigative material.
Thanks for listening.